So the lecture slides for today are already up in Moodle. I put them up earlier. And if you can go ahead and access them, but I'm also going to share my screen. So these are the lecture slides. They are up on Moodle. So just to give a background, we started off our module in a bit of an unusual fashion. I gave you an assignment, and the primary reason was to, first of all, to understand what you know about research, because you already know something, and from the presentations you gave, they were quite good. I was honestly impressed, and I hope what we are going to do now is basically to concretize what we know into general concepts. So today, what we are going to look at is basically an introduction to research. We're going to look at the nature of research and methods of research. That's essentially what we're going to look at. At any point, you can stop me and ask a question, but I will try as much as possible to bring up discussions as we go along so that we really concretize what we are trying to look at. Research, as I normally tell most students, can be a very daunting subject. It is it takes quite a lot of thinking power. It takes a lot from us as individuals. Many times we're worried about what we are writing, and research, from what I learned myself, especially when I was doing my PhD, was that research is not even about what you put down on paper. It brings something out of you. You learn quite a bit from yourself. Why? Because research is you as an individual bringing forward new knowledge to a certain field. So it brings something out of you, and that can be a bit scary sometimes. Some people end up giving up. Some people decide to take even the wrong shortcuts. They're trying to take shortcuts along the way. But what I want us to do is to understand that it's doable. That's the first thing, it's doable. It may take quite a bit out of you, but at the end of the day, what it brings out of you is good. So let us begin our journey here by first of all understanding what is research. And we can discuss it, what it is. I'm sure you know something about it, but let us begin. One of the first things we must understand is that research itself is an inquiry. It is an inquiry. That is a key point. So what that means is that when you start doing research, you as an individual, you are going to make a discovery. You're essentially going to make a discovery. And that discovery you're not making it for yourself per se, you're making it for the sake of a certain field, a certain research community that is saying, we don't know about this thing and we want to know more. If you remember when I gave you your assignment and I gave you different articles, I asked, what are the research areas that the authors are proposing? In other words, from literature, you yourself need to determine in a certain area what area is these people in this area trying to say that is not yet known, that needs to be known, and I want to embark on this area to try and discover and then report back to this area. So one, it is an inquiry. So an inquiry which is not known in a certain field, in a certain research community. Take note that it is not an inquiry in something you as an individual you don't know. Take an example. I remember somebody gave us I had a discussion with one of the professors in UMUP when I was also starting to do my research. He said, maybe you might say, I don't know the distance between the earth and the moon. Well, it may be you who doesn't know, but it's that question has already been answered. So if it's you who doesn't know, you cannot say, oh, I'm going to try and discover that. That's not research. If it has already been discovered, that is not research. So there must be a certain research community that is not aware. Now, this inquiry that is being done must be done in a systematic format, meaning there is agreed upon method which you're going to use to try and discover that thing, that inquiry. You're going to use a certain scientific method. So it's not just going to be a haphazard inquiry. It must be an agreed upon scientific method. That is why normally when one is doing research, they first tell you, start by doing literature review, write a concept paper, write a proposal, and all of them must be approved. So in that approval process, what they're essentially looking at is the area in which you're trying to make this inquiry. Is it an area that that needs to be known? Have you proved that in all instances, people in this research community, they really want to, they are saying that this is an area that is unknown and needs to be known? Then the methods you're going to use, are these appropriate methods? So that at the end of the day, your research outcomes, what you discover, can be something that can be reported and that can be accepted. One of the key points, if you're doing your research with sincerity, even you yourself, you will stop and ask yourself and say, but are these results, will I be sincere in reporting these results? Are these truly results that are truthful and sincere and can actually add value in this field? If you're doing really good research, those are questions you will ask. Just to ensure you yourself, you will ask. You'll ask it not simply because there are times you will do research and you just want to get over with it. I just want to do something and ensure my supervisor says okay, and they just mark it. But if you're doing doing research with an ethical mind behind it, you will also question your own results, because you want to report something that is true to a research community that is seeking knowledge. Now, in all of this, as we've discussed, one of the key things we've noted is that we are seeking solutions to problems, or we are seeking meaningful answers to certain questions. Now, when we talk about a problem, one of the big challenges that I normally find, especially when we're looking at an undergraduate study, most students want to have groundbreaking research, or we've discovered that there is inefficiency in this organization and we want to bring about efficiency. That's normally not research in its purest sense. Actually, most researchers will tell you that when you're doing research, what you do is discover more problems. Yeah, that is really what you do. But when we discover more problems, we're actually understanding the problem even more. So when we talk about solutions per se, we are not necessarily saying that we are solving world problems like there is world hunger, we are now bringing about food. No, we are seeking how to solve that problem, and our answers will add on, and each addition from every researcher brings a better and more and better solution as we go along the way. So now in this trying to solve these problems, we must have posed meaningful questions. We must have posed meaningful questions which indicate that the answer we shall get will be acceptable. So all of these, what I'm saying, will be questions that you will need to have posed. One meaningful question or one meaningful objective, so that at the end, when you give a meaningful answer or an acceptable answer. So what do we mean by this? There are research proposals or research concepts that will pose a question that is extremely ambitious, that cannot be answered even by 10 research projects. Take an example, somebody saying, the problem is we have world hunger and my intention is to bring about food security for the whole world. That cannot be solved. Even a whole country, even if you got the richest country in the world or the richest individual. For example, if you look at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they have really done a lot of work in terms of trying to solve poverty and all the likes, whatever you can think of. But even for all their efforts, what they've done is simply a drop in the bucket. So even your research cannot solve something, let's say like world hunger, or let us say world peace, to say my research is going to bring about peace. I remember one of our colleagues in Umwe, I think he got his PhD. His work was in peace studies. And I don't think his research brought about peace, because we have wars going on in Africa and the rest of the world. But your research can focus on just one thing in particular. Just maybe one thing in particular. Maybe in regards to peace. And if we bring it down to our research as ICT and IS students, we may be thinking of a particular area. Maybe we look at cybersecurity. We may be looking at ICT alignment and green technology, as we saw in one of the papers. We look at one particular area and we see how we will search for answers in that particular area. So now, in other words, what I've just been discussing about, when we look at non-meaningful questions, you find these are sometimes referred to as non-empirical research types. Those research types that may not necessarily bring about any result. And those research types are there. For example, those who are doing research maybe in philosophy, what they call metaphysical questions. Those research types are there, but we wouldn't find them in ICT or IS. A key point we shall discuss about in the next slides. Let me just change here this pen. Is looking at research, looking at our research types. We shall really try and understand positivism versus phenomenalism, or research that is looking at a phenomena. This will be a key point in our as we go along with the next slides. This is where we shall determine, is our research going to be qualitative or quantitative? Is our research going to be mixed method, or is going to fall more on one side than the other? So essentially, in the next slide, what we're going to look at, we are basically going to look at some of the key concepts in research. We shall look at research type, research philosophy. We shall look at research philosophy, the different approaches, strategy, the different strategies or methods. We shall look at multi-method approaches. Then we shall look at how to validate our research. This one, I think we may have an extra lesson on it, an extra session, just to make it clear, or a pre-recorded lecture, just to have some understanding on it. There's looking at credibility of research in a quantitative research or in a qualitative research. Then we shall also look at ethics of research design. When we look at this diagram here, it essentially covers all the concepts that we're going to look at. Research is considered like an onion, and you peel off one layer at a time. You have to understand each layer as you go along. It's a bit of a daunting task when you're starting, but it's a good idea we start now looking at it, and you may want to start thinking now about the type of research, or you may even have now thought about where you may want your research to go to, which area you want to go to, especially as you saw some of the articles that I gave you, that I tried to see to pick out areas for the different, for your specific study programs. So let us look at the first layer, which is research philosophy. Now, essentially, the research philosophies fall under these two: phenomena and positivism. Those are the two areas. There are others where we may talk about critical realism or pragmatism, but essentially, these are the two areas we shall look at. Essentially, these philosophies differ along different lines. One is logic. What do we mean by logic? How we reason that this is my finding. I'll give you just let us we shall look at all of them in detail, but your research may decide to take the thinking that if majority of my respondents fall to this, then this should be the truth. And whereas another one will say, if this is the belief, if this is the experience of my respondents, the experience of the respondent is then considered as the result, which I report. So that shows a different logic reasoning of saying this is the valid reasoning for my research. Then ethics, the study of right and wrong. How do we determine this is right and this is wrong? There are those who use numbers and say the fact that these are the majority, then this should be the right path. Then there are those who say no, it depends on who is experiencing that reality. Then epistemology, study of knowledge. So all of these, right now as we see them, these are simply the thinkings behind. But when you're writing your research, you'll not necessarily write this. You'll not necessarily say, oh, this is my reasoning. It will come out. You will automatically know what it is you want, the path you want to follow. I'll just give you an example, an experience from my own research. Now, I am an ICT profession from master's to PhD level. At undergraduate level, I was a student of development studies. Now, while I was doing my development studies, anyone who knows development, who may understand it, where it comes from, it's looking at the growth of a human being, the development of the total human being. If we pick out an individual, let's say Sheba is an individual, you want to see the development of Sheba in every sense of the word. That Sheba is not only developing in terms of income level, but Sheba is also developing socially, spiritually, politically. Everything around Sheba must grow. So bearing that in mind, the study of development, the field of development studies looks critically at all the thinkings of development, where at first they thought about industrial development. Let's bring about industry and people will develop. Then they realized, no, that doesn't work. They said, okay, let us look at structural development. Let us develop the education sector, the health sector, so and so, and things will develop. And then they realized, no, that doesn't work. And they said, let us look at human development indicators. We look at people's income levels, education levels, so on and so forth. And others realized, no, it doesn't work. Then rural development philosophy thinkings came about, where they said, no, it is the reality that counts. If you come and tell someone that I want to educate you and the person doesn't want to be educated, has other things, then all your works don't matter. So I came from that thinking. When I was doing my PhD, that thinking came in. And when I was doing my PhD, I remember thinking, when I made my clear choice, and I said, no, if I am looking at ICT looking at mHealth in a rural context, I really must go back to my development studies and how that thinking influenced me. And when I was doing my research, I didn't state it, but I knew as an individual who had come from that profession, I knew it was going to affect my research, and I leaned that way. Although there were so many other thinkings, I had to pick that thinking where I said, no, I really want to look at the reality of the individuals who are taking up this technology. What is their reality? Not what I think as an ICT profession, but what is the reality of those in poverty? What is it they want? What is it that they value? I must not think for them. So you can see there the ethics of my research, although I didn't state it exactly, but it influenced me. And the study of knowledge, how I made the decision, this was what is of value. This is what was of value to my respondents. I hope I'm making sense so far.
Yes.
Okay. So let us start with the very first philosophical thinking, the positivists. So the positivists, these are the ones who deal with numbers. They deal with positive facts, something that is observable, and a phenomena that is observable. Take an example. If we look at, just to give you the example of the COVID situation, when the scientists see the numbers are going up, then they say, now we are being hit by a second wave. They look at the numbers. They don't come and ask people, do you think we have a second wave? What do you feel about this? No, they look at the numbers. And they make a conclusion. The fact that we have an increase of positive cases, that means we have a second wave has started hitting, is hitting Uganda. And specifically, they know that second wave is hitting Kampala the most. Although others may argue that maybe those numbers, we can't really rely on them, because maybe in the other districts, the number of people being tested may not be as high as that one, which is in, let's say, in Kienjojo district, in Kabarole district, we may not be doing as many tests, and we may have also more, we may have the second wave also hitting us on this side. But however, that is essentially what the positivist will look at. Yes, they look at, observe something that is physically observable. They look at numbers. So normally some people like to say this is the scientific method. Although this can be also misleading. You find there are movements where people say, this is the real research, this is real research. And then, but even those who are on the qualitative side also say no. Also on the qualitative side, there are things that can be discovered that are not necessarily observable. So the primary goal normally with the positivist is not just to describe, to say we have this number of people that that have tested positive, but they also want to make a prediction. Yes, a prediction. The aim is to make a prediction that if we have this number of positive cases, then most likely, if we don't put measures, maybe by this time next week, all our hospitals are going to be packed up. They also want to give an explanation. Now, normally you find this research in people who are doing research in healthcare, social science research. Quite a bit of that is there, to have that quantitative outlook. It is very rare that you would find this kind of research maybe in IS or in ICT. Reason being is that research in this area normally affects a small section. Yes? When we are dealing with quantitative research, and if you want your research to be of a quantitative purely or more leaning to the quantitative nature, then you really need to have a huge number. The bigger the number, the more validated your results. The bigger the number, the more valid are your results. If you're going to give out a questionnaire maybe to 20 people, your research cannot be considered as valid. Your results cannot be considered valid. They cannot be, you can't say this research is representative of the rest of the population. So later on, we'll talk about validation and generalization. When we say my findings cannot be generalized to other areas. This is a key point, especially in quantitative. The bigger the number, the more you can say this is representative. So normally with the positivist outlook, one must understand that, okay, if I'm going to I'm going to be looking at quantitative research, I must know what is the total population of this research I'm doing. And then if I get the sample size, can I say that if I get this number of people, they are representative of all of all people who fall in this area? That is a key point. So you also need to be very careful when you're picking your research. Can you get this number of people? Is it possible? I'll just also give you an idea. I've been involved for quite some time with the Palliative Care Association of Uganda, and I came in because of my research background in mHealth, but in the process, I also end up helping in other research. And of recent, we were discussing about the possibility of doing research in with people who suffer, who suffer with the substance and who are substance and drug users, but specifically looking at their palliative care needs. And one of the things we were saying, we want to do a survey. And one of the questions we had was, can we really say we're going to do a survey all over Uganda? Is it really possible to go and give out a questionnaire with people with substance abuse? I can say I'm going to come and give to you, my students, a questionnaire, because you are of sound mind. If you're going to give me consent, you will actively say yes. Like now I've asked you, can I record? You say yes. because you're all of sound mind. But usually people who are of substance abuse, it may not be possible. So we began talking about it. We said, this is something we must think about. Can we say we're going to do a survey here? And we may not be able to say that. Actually, in the process, I went to read through literature, and one of the papers I got, the researchers were targeting 30 respondents, but in the end, they got nine respondents. So you see the drastic change. So now this is for an extreme case, but also you may be thinking about your research area, and you may think about, am I really going to do quantitative research? You may make you have to think about it. Then there's the other extreme opposite, when we're looking at a phenomena or a phenomenalist viewpoint. So this is the extreme opposite of the positivists, the extreme opposite. So here we are looking at experience. We study our experience. What do we mean? I gave you the example of COVID-19. For the scientists to know we have a second wave, they look at the numbers. How many new positive cases are we getting per day? As the numbers increase, then we know we are getting a second wave. The second wave is hitting Uganda. I was reading the BBC, and they were saying, whereas there are no new deaths in UK, there are, however, new cases. They are reporting over 3,000 new cases in the whole of UK. What does that mean? By the time you're bringing in new cases, there's a possibility a new wave is hitting. Now, though that is a purely positivist thing. Now, there may be another researcher who will say, we want to understand the experience of COVID-19, maybe for the patients. Now, their numbers will not help you. If you want to know the experience, then you really have to sit down with somebody who has maybe been hit by COVID and has recovered. What was their experience? I saw somebody write an article in Monitor where he talked about the pain he went through, the headaches. Others talk about not breathing. Someone gave the experience of that. He even looked at the machine that was helping him breathe. Now that is an experience. That is something you can't observe. Remember we looked at earlier at the positivists, we said we look at observable facts. But when we're talking about the fear somebody goes through, the pain somebody goes through, that is not observable. That is somebody's experience, which somebody then reports. Now, some people will say, oh, this is not scientific research. It is scientific research, especially if you want to look for an answer. I gave you the example, I don't know if it was this class or another class, where we talk about things like female genital mutilation, where you find government, everyone agrees this is an inhuman act and it must be outlawed. But you have individuals, women, who get up and even take their own children or even take themselves to have this seemingly inhuman act done to them. And someone may say, why don't we find out why these women do it? And one woman, I remember I read one woman's story who said she felt she was isolated from her community and she felt she needed to be part of it. And she went ahead and had it done. But for somebody to tell you that, you can't get this through a questionnaire. You really need to sit down and understand. Now, many times also, a lot of research can only bring out such answers when you decide to say, let me study a phenomenon. Now, ICT and IS, normally our research falls under here. They're usually phenomena that we need to understand. Usually, maybe to understand why a certain system, why a certain system may be taken up or not taken up. I don't know if for the IS students, you had that one article about which was based on action research, where in a certain organization they introduced, I think it was Lotus or something. It was a community's application, which was applied in a certain context, and to see if it could, I think, improve decision making at a group level. That is a typical example where a phenomena is being studied on whether it can be taken up or not. Look at incidents of now, look at the situations, let's say, of e-learning in Uganda. Ever since COVID came, institutions of higher learning have been pushed to try and pick up e-learning. Some institutions have picked it up relatively successfully, others no. Just look at the example of Makerere University. Makerere University, for all its resources, has barely picked up e-learning. I have two nieces that are at Makerere University, and the decision was that these students were supposed to go there for a month, have face-to-face, then leave the campus and go and have all the other classes online. But that didn't happen because lecturers said, no, me, I'm going to teach physical class. I'm not going to, if you want to attend my class, you must come to the physical class. Now, that is a phenomena one can say to understand why Makerere why this didn't take off. Yeah, what happened? And for all the resources Makerere has and all the support, why was it that this did not take off? And then in other situations, you have universities that have taken off. So that is a phenomena. And normally a phenomena looks at you're studying something within a certain time, location, and culture. And you're looking at experience. Now, some research can fall strictly on the positivist side, others on the phenomena side. But it's also possible to combine the two. Now, with the phenomena, normally the outcomes are descriptive. So you normally have a narration going on of a particular study. If you can go back and look at that article of action research, where a narration is given. I remember when I was reading through it, I was reading where some administrators were giving a narration, and you can see it in when the researcher is reporting, they give a narration, a qualitative, in qualitative terms, a narration of what people felt about this particular thing. But it's also possible to combine the two. I remember from my particular research, my research was largely qualitative, but at the end, I also gave a questionnaire to try and validate my findings on the qualitative side, that they also existed on the quantitative side. Do we have any questions with those two philosophies?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, please.
This is Tom. Good
Yes,
evening,
Tom.
team. I have a question.
Yes,
I
please.
may be interested in demographic projections. Take a situation like I want to know maybe customer retention in a certain company for a certain period of time, maybe in 5 years to come, in regards with product innovations. What kind of research can I apply? What kind of research is that? For example, if like I'm in system dynamics, I want to estimate the demographic projections for customer retention and the product innovations in a certain company, let's say telecom company. What kind of research can I use?
That one sounds very much like a more on the positivist side. Basically, we're looking at a survey, and which may be looking, it may be They call it longitudinal, where you're looking within a period of time. So which means you're collecting data over a certain period of time.
Exactly.
To let you know, to let you see the growth in the demographics.
Exactly.
Yeah, the changes. So you're basically picking, it is longitudinal, and it is also about within a certain organization. So that would be longitudinal study, but it would be more or less on the positivist side. You're looking at the demographics to understand why maybe you may say, I'm going to interview certain people, certain key people, maybe to give you the qualitative side. But to understand those demographics, you're really looking at the positivist side. So that would be quantitative, most likely longitudinal, which means you're collecting your data over a certain period of time, within a certain period of years.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So also you need to think about, for the sake of a master's degree, your research may, for instance, decide to focus on something short term. However, there may be some organizations which decide to pick certain data over certain periods of time. For example, I'm not sure if NITAU has bothered to take that time. That is something, if let's say I had a relationship with people in NITAU, I think that would be something I would really wish they would focus on, to pick certain data over a certain period of time, which then researchers like you can pick up. What do I mean? Through my relationship with PICAO, Palliative Care Association of Uganda, I've realized PICAO makes an effort to pick certain data. For example, every month, the palliative care nurses or health workers at certain hospitals, all hospitals in Uganda, are expected to send certain data to PICAO every month. So initially they started it by saying they wanted to follow up on how much morphine is being consumed. So for example, let's say at Nsambia Hospital, they've received this amount of morphine, how much morphine have they used? But they also pick other data. So let's say aggregate data on how many patients they have. Of those patients, how many are HIV positive, how many have cancer, and any other disease that needs palliative care. So in that manner, PICAO has got quite a huge amount of data. And one of the things I know they discovered through their data is they found that certain types of cancer are related to HIV positive patients, and that produced more research. So imagine also if NITAU also made a decision to collect certain kinds of data over long periods of time. For example, I know they carried out some research to find out people who do certain types of degrees in ICT, maybe in what kind of jobs do they get, those in computer science, those in software engineering, where do they end up, and things like that. They can also go ahead and pick certain information like how many organizations have ICT policies, how many organizations have ICT strategies, how many organizations are using enterprise architecture, things like interoperability, things like that, where you may need quantitative data, and which you may not be able to do within a master's degree or even a PhD, but you can get that data from NITAU. Imagine something like that. I think this is one of the things. Maybe if I think I would love to work with NITAU to collect that kind of quantitative data. Something that you may not be able to do now. Even like what Tom you're saying, that is information an authority like that can be able to pick up, let's say from e-commerce organizations, to understand the demographics, how many people are now shopping more online, and what are the demographics, what kind of customers are we getting in that area. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, very well, very well. It is very clear.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes,
Doctor,
please. Yes, please.
Your bubble, but while you're enthusiastic about meeting with NITAU,
Yeah.
this is what explained is something that NITAU has been trying to do, but they failed from the beginning.
Okay.
So the work they have been doing is work that was expected to be done by UCC. And as we speak now, NITAU was dissolved. NITAU was now to merge with UCC. Now one department called UCC.
So now basically NITAU, I'd read about that, but basically now NITAU is under Ministry of ICT or?
No, UCC.
It's under UCC. Okay. Okay. But still, even as an authority, well, yeah, one of the unfortunate bits when an organization is too large, it can tend to fail at certain areas. Because when I look at something like UCAO, it's something very small, but the amount of data they are able to collect, it's amazing. And they are using a very simple technology. They simply downloaded. They used I forget what is open. I forget the open source app they used. Just downloaded it on health workers' phones, and the health workers simply send this digital data every month. And it's available for people to do research. I remember I got in touch with the Faculty of Health Science at UMU, telling them this data is available for your students to go and do research. If they can't go out in the field, this data is available. Something like that can also be made available by these authorities for ICT, for us to really make some good research and some good propositions to organizations and likewise.
Yes, please, Dr. Shiba.
Yes, please.
This is Kripen.
Yes, Kripen.
I want to be guided in relation to Tom's question.
Yes, please.
Where you responded that what Tom asked was a longitudinal research.
Yes.
Now, for the sake of this course or our masters, would you advise somebody to go for a longitudinal research?
No, that is why I gave the example that for masters research, this would not be a good idea because you wouldn't have that amount of time. But then that's when I also then suggested that probably some of these authorities, they can really pick this data over time, and then students like you then use this data. I remember I attended, I was just helping out. And in fact, that time I was simply a chair. But there was a student of development economics who did it was really extensive research on that kind of data, but he got his data from UBOS, Uganda Bureau of Statistics. That's where he got his data. And all his data he got from there. He didn't go to the field and pick it. He simply got the statistical data that UBOS collects over time. Now that's why I was suggesting that for ICT, I was thinking authorities like NITAU now, which is now going under UCC, they really could do a lot by collecting such data so that a master's student who wants to do that kind of research has that data already available. And the student doesn't have to go and collect data for over 5 years. That data has already been collected by an authority like NITAU or UCC. Kripen, have I made sense?
You have maybe another inquiry.
Yes, please.
You noted that in your own PhD work,
yes,
you had both the qualitative and the quantitative.
Yes.
Now, am I right to say that's triangulation?
Okay, yeah, I would say yes, something like that. Something like that. My research was it was really very much qualitative. That's where my primary data came from. I simply, gave out the questionnaire just to try and triangulate, as you say, to try and point out that even in the quantitative inquiry, those variables were also visible. A number of respondents stated that these variables I had observed within in the qualitative research. It also a number of people were saying, yes, it is true, this thing exists. Okay, let's move to the next concept. In our research onion, the next aspect we're going to look at is research approach. So once you have understood or you have selected where in which philosophy your research will fall, either it is positivism or phenomenal, you then select your approach, what approach you're going to have. Is it going to be deductive or inductive? So when we have a deductive approach, we are essentially saying that we are going to start from a theory, an existing theory, and we're going to test. We're going to test a hypothesis. And I remember, Krippen, we had this discussion when you did your presentation. When your research is quantitative, there is an existing theory that proposes something, that states this thing as being true. I'll give you an example of a theory that exists in ICT, specifically concerning with adoption. Several theories have been developed. One of it that I can remember is the TAM theory, which is technology acceptance model. So this technology acceptance model proposes certain assumptions. And obviously this theory was developed over time. And one of the things that TAM proposes, it proposes that a technology will be adopted if, one, it is considered easy to use, and two, it is considered useful. It goes ahead to propose that most female users will adopt a technology if they consider it easy to use, and most male users will adopt a technology if they consider it useful. So that is a theory that exists. And a researcher in ICT can say, maybe I'm going to find out if this is the reason why e-learning has failed or has taken off in certain areas, in certain institutions. And the person says, I'm going to do a quantitative study based on this theory. That is taking a deductive approach. And the deductive approach basically saying that if the more of the positive side say this is true, then that means it is the case. So when somebody takes a deductive approach, basically what they do is they develop a hypothesis. So someone would say, maybe Makerere did not take up, if an institution has not taken up an e-learning platform, that basically means maybe it was, number one, it's not easy to use. Number two, it is not functional. One of those two. And they go about to test that hypothesis. Now, the challenge, of course, can be is that you may find that something is actually easy to use, but a person, maybe the lecturer has a negative experience and says, maybe I will not be able to teach effectively. And therefore, the positivist approach becomes null and void. So for all of them, it depends really on what you're thinking. The inductive approach is the very opposite again, just as the philosophies are completely opposite. Inductive approach is the very opposite. We use the inductive approach when we know nothing, when we know little, and we want to develop a theory. Now, I'll give you my experience from my research. My research was looking at sustainability of mHealth applications in rural areas. Now, when I did my literature review at that time, all ICT4D academicians were saying, they were basically saying that we don't have sustainability in ICT4D. And one of the primary reasons we don't have sustainability is that rigorous research is not being done. Most people are simply bringing in ICT4D with a hyped up thinking, saying, if we bring in ICT4D, we shall close the technology gap for Africa and developing countries, and we shall automatically bring up development, which was the kind of attitude that came with e-commerce. When the millennium hit, people said, we all go online and automatically we don't need the physical business, and e-commerce businesses failed. So they also, that all ICT4D academicians were saying, we don't have any rigorous research to let us know what works and what does not work. So essentially my research was saying, since we have not had that research, and my research was going out to discover, basically go out to make a discovery. And if you looked at even the title of my research, it said towards, meaning we are starting to develop a theory or understanding of the phenomena of sustainability and rural areas. My research was going to go and discover what works and what doesn't work in rural areas. So that was the inductive approach. So let us look at the deductive approach. We start by saying, if the theory is true, we want to discover if the theory is true. For example, I gave you the term theory. And you say, if the theory is true, X will occur. Then we test if X actually exists. So now if we said, if we're talking about e-learning, why have some universities not taken up? Then we take up the assumption, we say, we have the hypothesis, the e-learning platforms have not been adopted in public universities because they are not easy to use, and because they are not, we have the first hypothesis saying because it's not easy to use, and the second one because it is not useful, it's not considered useful. And we go and test those two hypotheses. Now the hypothesis may come out as positive or negative. We may actually find they are easy to use and they are useful, but they're still not taken up. So you would go out to your respondents just to find out, is this platform easy to use? Yes or no? You'd have your questionnaire. So you go out to test if this thing is easy to use or it is not easy to use. That is you now testing a hypothesis. If X does not occur, if X occurs, that means it supports your theory. It supports this theory. If X does not occur, that means it doesn't support this theory. Now, it doesn't mean that the theory is false. It then basically means something else is going on. And probably the research needs to take another aspect. Now, for you as a researcher, even if you find a negative result, it doesn't mean you failed. No, you still report and you simply say, maybe for the next researcher, they may try a qualitative approach to try and find out why. Even if you get a negative result, it is a result which must be reported. You remember, if you go back to the IS article of the failed action research, that had to be reported. That means that somebody else can try another approach. Have I made sense there? That is a key point. Our results are not always supposed to be positive. Even a negative result is something that must be reported. Am I clear on that?
No.
No. Okay. Let me give you, whether you're doing deductive or inductive, a negative result is also always a result. Let me explain now using my own experience from my research. My research was action design research. So action design, we shall talk about strategies, but about research methods. Action design research is a combination of action research and design research. Now, what happens with action research is that you have an existing problem within a certain context. Maybe you have an organization that has an efficiency problem and you design an ICT solution and put it in the context. Now, as you put it in the context, you see how the context reacts. Oh, that is the participants. They'll say, I don't like this thing, I like this thing. Then you change your solution. Then you put it back and then you see how the participants react. Now, for my particular research, I started with a design on paper where I wanted to, where I implemented this in a health facility. I brought it and presented it to the participants. And the first thing the participants told me was, you're telling us that we as doctors should sit on a computer and make a VoIP call to a patient. I said, which doctor has that time? Now, Tom, for me as an ICT professional, that was like, oh, a knife to the heart, because, you know, as ICT professionals, we want our solutions to help. But as a researcher, that was a key point. When the doctors said, we don't, as medical doctors in a rural hospital, we simply don't have the time to sit down and make calls. We have X amount of patients we must see daily. We don't have that time. So that was a key point for me to grab and report. Second negative result I got was when I went to the rural communities and was presenting to them this solution that was supposed to use SMS. The first thing that happened, one elderly gentleman raised his hand and said, for me, the only thing I know to do with the phone, I know how to make a call and to end the call, period. I don't know how to use SMS at all. Now, again, that was a negative, but in terms of research, it was a positive.
Yes.
Do you get it, Tom?
Yes, it's clear.
Yes. Even the negative you get is something to report because it was an assumption you had that could be done, but actually it cannot be done, and you report it.
Yes, please, Doctor.
Yes, Kripen.
I can also give draw in some small example.
Yes.
There are special researches where you find in that a negative makes more sense than a positive.
Yes.
For example, if I'm carrying out a research on increasing employers' salary, and when I look at the turnover, I expect the turnover to be in a negative. In some cases, the turnover is negative.
Yes.
In other words, when you increase people's salaries, they don't normally leave the organization. So what happens? You find that when you increase the salary, employer turnover reduces. Now, in that reduction, it means when one increases, another one reduces. Now, that reduction, in most cases, gives you a negative. Yes.
Okay. And even also on in other cases, someone might say, let us increase salary and see if the turnover, you assume in theory that turnover should reduce, but in reality, people still keep going. Even that one is important to report it because then you can report and say, the fact that we increased salary, but still turnover increased, maybe somebody else can do research to find out why. What are the other reasons for people leaving even when there is a good salary going on. For example, I remember somebody, some years back, somebody reported that Centenary Bank made a decision to pay their workers well to reduce corruption. And then it turned out that didn't happen. People were still corrupt, even with very good salaries. So even somebody can say, okay, let me do research to find out, maybe do qualitative research to find out what are other causes of corruption. Okay, let us look at, let's continue. So specifically with deductive, you have situations of you will have a hypothesis. So the hypothesis is derived from the theory. So here the hypothesis essentially is looking at two concepts which are supposed to have a relationship. Like what Crippen said, increasing salary and turnover. Those are two concepts that are supposed to have a relationship. So here you have an example of age and gross annual income. So we imagine that the older you grow, your gross annual income may increase or otherwise. So even when we think now on the example which I gave you of the term theory, where you will have usability and acceptance, usefulness and acceptance. The two are supposed to increase to have a relationship with one another. But the hypothesis was derived from a theory. So you have the theory from which you derive a hypothesis, then from there you make an observation and then a confirmation. So that is essentially the deductive approach. So you may make a decision whether your research is going to take the deductive approach or the inductive approach. So the inductive approach, here you're building theory. For example, and when you build theory, you're essentially saying that this is an area that has had little or no research. Like I gave you the example of my research in ICT4D and sustainability. Here you're looking at experience. Here this particular slide looks at the experience of people working in a particular farm, where you may ask employees what they feel about a certain issue, and basically job satisfaction. And from there, you begin to formulate a theory. Sorry. So in building the theory, you're trying to understand people's view, how people view their world. So here, remember I had given you an example of female genital mutilation, where the first thinking of lawmakers was, this is an inhuman act. It obviously, number one, it's excruciatingly painful. Two, it deforms people. It causes also long-term health effects to women. But even with all those observable facts, you found people going back, especially women going back and carrying out this act on themselves and even for their daughters. So the question is to try and understand, come up with a new theory of what is it that makes us want to do certain things. We want to belong. Everybody wants to belong. When you see, for example, young people taking selfies, looking a certain way, putting on makeup, they want to belong in a certain group of people. When you see people taking up certain behaviors, they want to belong. When they carry out certain acts, when you now see more and more young people going to tattoo their bodies or do body piercings, they want to belong to a certain class of people, a certain society, a certain community. So basically, there you're trying to understand how human beings interpret their world. Now, even in ICT, we can also have the same thing. Why would a certain technology be adopted over another? We even have now things like we have e-learning going on. We have social media. People really take up information on social media and trying to understand that world. Now, this also doesn't mean that only in ICT we can only have this, but also in other cases, we saw we can have research which is going to look at experiments. That really is a positivist attitude when if your research is going to look at experiments. We saw articles which were looking at context-aware applications and testing them. Those are really experimental lab tests. Those are purely positivist. So it depending again on what kind of research you're looking at. So now when we look at inductive, we're looking at context matters. I gave you the example of my research which was really looking at context. Now, this type of research looks at a very small sample. When you're looking at context, you're looking at very small samples. You're looking at quantitative methods. You are trying to understand why a certain phenomena is happening. Why is X happening rather than Y? Why does it take place? So you have the inverted process happening where you first observe. From the observation you notice a pattern. From the pattern you develop a tentative hypothesis and then eventually a theory. So now anyone who's doing this kind of research, one of the things you must keep in mind is that you're proposing. You don't state this as a complete truth. You propose. Then others build on your research. I remember I gave you an example, I think it was you the last time we met, about one particular student of mine whom I supervised, who decided to use a framework that was developed in South Africa that was looking at sustainability of a community application. And he said he wanted to validate if this framework if the variables proposed in this framework can also be found in Uganda. So he also applied this framework with a community application that he was working on within his organization. And then in the end, he made conclusions that, or maybe this variable was visible in Uganda while it was not visible in South Africa. And that, by that research being published, the theory could be built further. Combining the approaches. It can be quite advantageous to combine the approaches. I remember Crippen asked me specifically with my research, when we talked about triangulation, when you're trying to validate some of your research, it can be quite advantageous to try and combine the two. One might say, for example, I gave you the example of trying to understand why some institutions have had success with e-learning while others may not. One might say, I'm going to take a quantitative approach, try and understand why maybe some public universities are failing to adopt online learning while others are. And you take term as your theory, but you might decide to say, I'm also going to have a qualitative part where I may try to understand some certain things that may not be pulled out, feelings of people, feelings of lecturers and students on why they may not take up this online learning as opposed to others. You might find there may be certain things that may be revealed that the theory doesn't consider, that the hypothesis doesn't consider, and it generates new data or a more reflective understanding. It might be a good idea to combine your methods in that sense. But however, this all depends on you as a researcher, on what it is truly you're seeking. One of us, and the other reason when you, for taking a combined approach is that your survey data it could be like a backup should we say. You may collect quite a bit of survey data, but your computer crashes and you lose all your respondents. Although this may not be a good excuse, you must always have a backup. You must always have a backup. That one is clear. The other thing about also the inductive side, inductive research or data can be extremely labor intensive. And this one I can tell you from my experience. I collected a lot of qualitative data, quite a lot. And once you collect qualitative data, what that means is that you have a lot of narrations from which you must develop themes. And this can be quite a lot. So now I remember one of the things I did was I relied also a bit on my quantitative side to help me pick out the themes so that I could reduce quite a bit of time. Most of my narrations, I remember, where I sat for long hours with the community members as they talked and talked and talked, and quite a bit of that information was unnecessary. So to pick it out was quite laborious. So the fact that at least I had both sides, it helped me shorten my time for picking out the themes from all those narrations people were making. Any question before I come to strategies on approach?
Doctor, my question is.
Yes, please.
You could be having the existing solution.
Yes.
And on that existing solution for a certain organization, you may need to add some improvement on it. How can you address such? Also, what kind of research can you make? How can you really address that to big people and, come up with the, I don't know how I can even phrase it. Companies, various, organizations have solutions which are still existing. But you may need to put, some improvement to the existing solution. How can you address that? I don't know whether I'm phrasing it well.
Okay, first hold on, let me first put this back into. Okay, what you're trying to say is, if, let's say you have an existing solution within an organization, and you want to make an improvement on it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now the question would be, why do you want to make an improvement on it?
Yes. For example, you may it may not be answering well, the company's questions. It may take some, turnaround time to be, so many things may arise during its, existence when it is working, and as solutions. And you can identify a problem of improving that solution, adding some more functionalities.
Yeah. So now your research,
because you said that many people have researched so many things.
Yes.
Is it allowed to make some improvement on some things that have already they've already discovered?
Yes, it is allowed. Now, what your research would do is, your problem would be that despite having this IS or this solution, there's still no improvement. There's still a gap missing. Yes. So your proposal, what you're proposing, or your objective would be, your objective is to improve the existing solution.
Yes.
You want to improve the existing solution. And then what you report back is if it actually does bridge the gap which has been identified. And your report back would be either positive or negative. Do you remember, if you looked at that article for Action Research, for them, they put forward the solution, but there was a failure and they reported that failure. So your research, in a sense, you don't fail your dissertation at all. Because your dissertation is not that you have designed a very good thing that people have accepted. No, it is that you followed the scientific process. That's why you pass your dissertation.
Okay.
It isn't that you design something that works very well. No.
Shouldn't be 100%.
No, your design can fail. But the objective of research is that you followed the scientific process. That is the objective of the research. I remember even when I was defending my thesis, at the end of it, what all the panelists said, the question they asked them, has she followed the scientific process? And for me to pass, the answer was yes. It isn't that I designed an mHealth application that works very, no, the mHealth application could have failed for all they cared. But did I follow the scientific process in my inquiry? So also for you, you may design something, it may or may not work, but the discovery that you made,
yes,
that is the objective.
Okay.
Yeah. Although I do know sometimes some supervisors and some people on the panel, they are maybe more interested in the technical side, but in actual essence, that is not what research is. That is a key point.
So it means research at the end, you may not yield the results, but the most important thing is to follow the scientific procedures.
Yes, yeah, that even when you report back your results may be, this was a failure. The application actually didn't bring about the improvement that we thought.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Hello.
Yes, please, Michael.
Adding on to that, I was inquiring.
Yes.
The investigations that we see on TV is part of what we are discussing right now. Because when you look at the investigations, at the end of the day, these guys don't come up with any solution. They just get data and display to us, and it stops there. So,
like, what do you mean?
Like what I mean?
Like give me an example. Because in research,
yes,
one of the key points in research, what you must know is research means you're bringing about new knowledge. That is a key point. You're bringing about new knowledge to a certain research community. If you're doing research, you're doing research to, let's say in context-aware applications. There must be a community that is asking about that area, that particular area. There must be a research community that is seeking knowledge in that area. Like I pointed out when I was pointing out my research, there was a research community that was stating ICT4D research doesn't undergo rigorous research, and it is important to determine what works and what doesn't work. So there was a research community that needed to know, needed that kind of information. So the ones on TV, they may be people just reporting statistics. So it could be data they're presenting, but it's not, it could be research in quotes, but it's not academic research.
Okay, noted.
Actually, the one on TV is not research. It is an opinion poll.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Moses, for clarifying that. That's an opinion poll. Okay, let's move to our next concept, which is research strategies. So here, these research strategies are basically what we refer to them as research strategies or research methods. So here we have several of them. This slide simply presents a summary of them. Some methods you may not use at all. Some methods you may use. Some you may combine. But let's look at them one at a time. One of the key things is to say they are not mutually exclusive. That means rarely do we say we are going to use just one research alone. Someone will not say, someone may say, I'm going to do an experiment, but it may be within a case. If it's a survey, it's also within a specific context. Things like that. Someone may say, I'm going to do design science research, but within a case. You combine. So the first one is the experimental design. So I think one of the articles we looked at was using experimental design. I'm not sure, I'm not very sure about it, but here you're looking at something in a highly controlled environment, extremely highly controlled environment study. So let's take an example. You may design a context-aware application, and you may decide to take it through tests. You may have two control group tests where you may take it through.